Ladies and gentlemen, if anybody wishes to speak this evening, if you would fill out a speaker card, let me know what the agenda item is, and I just will allow you to speak at the appropriate time. Thank you. If anyone wishes to speak for the closed session item, I'd appreciate it if you fill out a speaker card or any other item on the agenda. Thank you. This is a meeting of the San Luis Valley Union High School Board of Education. It's February 13th, 2020, and the time is 5:30. Mrs. Westfall, the minutes should reflect that we have one more board member who just is walking in the door. All board members are present. Thank you.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I need a motion to approve the agenda as written. So I have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Respectfully, will not be approving the minutes for the agenda this evening because the request I made on January 30th to have a particular item placed for discussion was purposefully not included on the agenda.
For January 30th, which one was that, John?
What was the?
If you just.
What was the item?
Yes.
Just like me circulate the email for the meeting.
Can you just tell me what it is? Regarding graduation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, motion second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Motion carries.
No.
4-1. Before the board goes into closed session regarding employee discipline, release, dismissal complaint, Government Code 54957B, the board would like to give anyone the opportunity to speak this evening. Again, I have 2 speaker cards here. I will start with the speakers. If anybody else wishes to speak, I'd appreciate it if you'd give them to me now. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Anyone else at this time? Okay, thank you. Our first speaker is Janine Philippin.
Hello there. I just have a thought for you.
Okay.
Does the principal's behavior exemplify the direction and leadership the board expects or desires for the students or not? If the answer is yes, then vote to renew the contract. If the answer is no, then don't renew it. Your choice in this matter will speak volumes about the nature of your character and what you want for the San Ynez High School students. Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Mr. John Dragonet.
Good evening. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Mr. Swanitz being retained as principal. To me, when nothing is broken, there's nothing to fix. And I've never seen anything that suggests there's any good reason for him not to be retained as a principal. We have a senior in high school right now. We've known Mr. Swanitz for years, and he's always done a fantastic job. The kids like him. The kids can talk to him. They come to our house. We talk about the principal all the time. There's never been any reason I've ever heard of why he shouldn't be retained. I know there are a few vocal opponents of people, but I think the vast majority of us are very satisfied with the job that Mr. Swanitz has done. I sent you guys all a letter last night as well. Hopefully you all got that. I know I got one email back from somebody, so you must have received it. I hope you take the silent majority's opinions into account here and not anybody with an axe to grind or any sort of ulterior motives. So please retain Mr. Swanitz. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luke?
I apologize, I'm still out of breath from running here. Just real quickly, I think this school is in need of better leadership. I think if you just scratch the surface a little bit, the signs are everywhere. If we want to choose to look at them, we can. If we want to choose to look the other way. I don't have an axe to grind, and I know a lot of parents don't. I really don't. I would never speak out against someone losing their job deep down. But this is not about that. It's about making it better for our kids and making a better environment, especially for our teachers. So they have a better environment. We want to put them in, like I said the last time I was here, in a position to succeed, and we're not doing that. Just real quickly, 2 weeks ago, I talked to one of our teachers. Because of the vindictive nature of Scott Corey, I don't want to say this person's name, but he is overwhelmed in this class. He has intermediate, beginner, and advanced students, 30-some, 40-some in the classroom. My son is in his classroom. Just dropped the class because 6 months into it, he's not learning anything, sadly. So we have now going to the library so we can work on other classes. The teacher said that recently 8 kids were just dumped into his classroom. Dumped. I said, what do you mean dumped? These are kids who do not want to learn. They don't want to be here. So they put them in our classroom. One of them started a fire within the first week of being there. What we do here at the school is we go to the lowest denominator. 8 kids don't want to learn, put them in that class. And guess what? No one's not learning in that class. This is the constant thing. And I'm sorry, I think it starts with our superintendent. The buck stops with him. And as far as I know financially, thank you for turning on the clock again, extra minute. Financially, as far as I know, we're in pretty much insolvency, on the doorstep of bankruptcy. Not good, if I'm correct, except we're dipping into reserves. Okay, that's not good. I know we can blame the oil companies. I know we can blame the homeschool at Charter Oak. Maybe we ought to ask why so many kids are going to Charter Oak and why so many parents don't want to send our kids. There's kids in school here. We can do so much better for the sake of our kids. We get one shot at this as parents, as you know. We get 4 years to send them here, and that's it. And to wait and keep waiting and tolerating this, we're very reactionary. Our superintendent and our principal are very reactionary. The board, parents complain to the board does something, they'll do it. Why aren't they proactive? That's a sign of good leadership. And I wish I could give more specifics. I'm available if you want to give you more specifics. We can do better. We need to do better for our kids. Thank you very much.
Mr. Luke, what class was that?
That was, I hate to say it.
Go ahead.
Mr. Corey's been I've had 2 encounters with him. He's been very good to me. When Mr. McClure was in the meeting last spring, he talked about standing up to Scott and having his job put on the line. And it's intro to awe. It's intro to awe. Okay, my son wants to be an engineer, maybe an automobile engineer. I don't know, he's out of the class. He's not 6 months. I asked him the other day to hand me a pliers when I was working my truck. He handed me a tin snips. Shame on me as a parent. But why isn't he learning that? Just the basic. He knows nothing about the internal combustion engine, and nor do any of his friends in that class.
Thank you, Mr. Luke.
Landon Lasan, Gunnar Johnson, Logan Woodall. You can ask him. If you scratch the surface, you will find these things out. If you only come to board meetings and listen to Mr. Corey say how great everything is, you'll never know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Luke. Since we have no other speakers before the closed session, the board will now go into closed session. The time is 5:40. And again, employee discipline, release, dismissal, complaint, Government Code 54957B. Thank you.
Everybody.
time, the board is reconvening in open session. The time is 6:08, Mrs. Westfall. The board would like the public to know that the following decision has been seriously considered in multiple challenging closed session conversations and was a decision not made easily. That being said, in closed session this evening, the board took action to issue a notice pursuant to Education Code Section 44951 that a certificated administrative employee identified by number 199 shall be released effective at the end of the 2019-2020 school year from the administrative position of principal, Santa Ynez Valley Union High School, and reassigned to a certificated assignment within the scope of the employee's credentials, beginning in the 2020-2021 school year, and directed the superintendent to send out appropriate legal notices. The roll call vote in closed session was unanimous. Okay. Mr. Corey, superintendent's reports and presentations.
Our student representative, Ella Hoos, was unable to be here this evening. She's actually presenting up in Sacramento with Youth in Government, speaking for the legislative floor. I would like to introduce our Measure K Citizens Oversight Committee for the presentation of their annual report. Looks like we have most of the members here this evening. If you could come forward right now and present your report.
Good evening. My name is Michelle DeWord, and we are the COC committee. Alan Jones and Melissa Riddell couldn't make it tonight. And Valerie Fouette as well. I'd like to introduce the members of the Citizens Oversight Committee. This is for the Measure K bond funds. We have Lynn Hemming, Elizabeth Davidian, and Richard Valentine. We'd like to present our 2018-19 fiscal report. We'd like to just report that there was a clean audit and that all Measure K funds that were expended on Measure K projects for the year were all everything. So it was perfect. If you have any questions about our report, we're happy to take any questions.
I would actually like to thank Ms. DeWord and the committee for the work on this, very thorough and some nice new elements to it, so thanks to all of you for your work on that. The function of this board is actually to help us do the right thing with the accounting of $14.7 million of the taxpayers' money. And so it's a great symbiotic relationship with the district, and it's all volunteer time, so thank you very much to all of you for what you've done. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michelle.
And then the next is number 3, construction update. This one will be very short. I referenced before that we're experiencing some delays in our timeline. I'm happy to report that we are back on schedule for major completion, significant completion of the project by the end of March. So we are back on track.
And so that project is, as far as, are we talking about the cafeteria?
Correct. That's the cafeteria addition, the remodel of the pit, all the associated utilities, everything associated with this current scope of work should be completed by the end of March.
Does that mean that the students will be able to enjoy that?
So no, there will still be a period of time for punch list completion for items that are not finished when they say they're finished, and all those things that happen with construction projects. In addition, we'll still have to get furniture in there, trainings, and then finish up all of those details. That will take us through the end of the school year to get that completed. So, but we are hoping to have students actually utilizing the area going through there and opening up the center of campus by the end of March. So, and then this break coming up next week, we will be engaging in a lighting project in the parking lot out front, doing the trenching, providing the electrical, to hopefully energize those lights and have them in place in the next couple of weeks.
that is also a wonderful thing, because I know I struggle with this up and down, not being able to see really well at nighttime. So for older people, that's going to be a good thing. Well, balance.
Thank you, that's it.
Anybody else?
No.
All right. Item E1, public comment. Mary Conway.
Good evening. I'm Mary Conway, and I am the director of the San Ynez Valley Youth Coalition through People Helping People. And I just wanted to say that I've been working with Mr. Swanitz and our vice principal, Mr. Haas, on a drug task force. And I'm just really grateful to them for keeping this thing rolling. We've had a few meetings, and our purpose is to really look at our campus and focus on, well, we're focusing on vaping right out of the chute, but we're really looking at some of the data that we had from our Healthy Kids survey and focusing on the things that we hope we can help with in regards to the drug and alcohol usage on campus and trying to get our kids some treatments. So I just wanted to let you know that that is happening, and I'm grateful to Mr. Swanitz for getting that through, and Mr. Corey, and it's going to be a long process. But if anyone has any suggestions on what we might do for our kids here on campus, I'm always open as the coalition director to better understand how we can serve our kids and keep them safe. And I will say, just because there's lots of folks here, that there is a lot of bad drugs on the street. Fentanyl is being laced in pills and marijuana, and I think we just have to be able to warn our families and to warn our young people that fentanyl, you don't know it's there, and we've lost 2 of our community members just recently, and I'm afraid that there's going to be more, being that that's right outside the doors, and our kids think they're smoking or taking pills that might harm them but won't kill them. So I think we as a community need to be very, very concerned and spread the word that we have drug dealers making these drugs with fentanyl, which is an instant overdose death. So,
Mary, are you seeing more resources down the road coming to schools for, prevention, for programs, either through the county or the state level? I mean, we're all trying to scramble to do it on our own, or through grants, et cetera. But do you see a larger commitment for resources for districts?
well, a lot of it's about money, and so our coalition has a county grant through the state. We had a federal grant for 10 years prior to that. So I see that our government entities are wanting to put money into it. They're scared. We have an opioid epidemic, as well as fentanyl is just hitting our schools and our kids, unmercifully. So as far as our resources, we can refer to the best practices that are research-based and that are used across the country. I don't see, well, we did hope that we could get a resource officer here that could work with our kids. So that's a local resource. It's dragging its feet, unfortunately. In the Sheriff's Department is what I understood. But so I'm hoping that we will be getting more local resources, not just for our high school, but our junior high.
Okay. Thanks, Mary.
Can I ask one thing too? I think, Mr. Corey, perhaps you could answer this question. I believe that one of our parents, Sherry Lewis, kind of took the initiative and was, with Mr. Corey's approval, put signs in all the bathrooms. I'm assuming they're still there about the dangers of fentanyl and what it looks like and these kinds of things. And I'm hoping that that at least is getting the attention of some of the kids.
Be really interesting to survey our kids, and that was going to be something that I was going to pass through the task force. I just need to put it together, and we'll take a look at it at our next meeting. But we need to hear from the kids, and I also want to recognize Chip Faninga and Miss Lee. Cheryl Lee's been incredible in utilizing her classroom and the students and their projects to put out either pro-social messages or prevention messages through video, and I believe that she has one playing here now, and she's always worked with our coalition to do a big push in April along with Chip. So the more teachers we can get involved and the more students and clubs, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna get to a majority of the kids and hopefully parents.
Mary, we are going to be establishing a health class.
Yes, very
and
good.
I certainly hope that the coalition will work with whoever we hire for teaching is to get this message out to our kids really early on their freshman year and continue it through the curriculum.
Yeah, we really need that.
Senior year.
You just have to keep it going, and things are moving so quickly with the trends and everything. You just can't stop. You have, as parents, you have to continually have those conversations and be aware of what's out there. Our kids are really exposed to a tremendous amount of products, and they don't understand, you know, how dangerous oftentimes they are, nor do their parents. So.
Mary, the current drug that upsets me the most is vaping. Vaping is a vehicle that can be loaded with any other illicit drug that the individual may choose. It's not just tobacco substitutes. So my question is, and I have in my notebook the wonderful study with the Youth Coalition that you presented last spring. Those numbers still ring in my head. They're very discouraging. In several of those metrics, San Ynez High School, unfortunately, is number one in the county. So my question is, how does the anti-vaping efforts of our high school today, February 2020, compare to what we were doing as far as prevention and education in February 2018?
I'm aware of a few things, and we can never do enough, and we can never do fast enough, but I am aware of some things that have been taking place other than through awareness, but I did notice that when I got onto the website, our new website, right popped before I could even see the high school was a little short video on vaping, and I thought, wow, I have never seen that before at the high school, so I was really grateful to see that. I feel like our high school teachers, and I want to recognize Ashley Coelho, they're starting to take interest in doing what they can in their classrooms. So I'm seeing some improvement compared to other schools, because I look at what other schools are doing and what their numbers look like, and I feel like our community could be stronger, our parent efforts could be stronger around this situation, and then what we're doing at school, we just have to do more.
That's my frustration, is that I don't see that we are coming close to ramping up our efforts as the problem becomes exponentially worse every year. And truly it is an exponentially growing problem. And so what I would love is for somebody who has the expertise to step up and say, San Ynez High School, here are the programs that are known to have been successful in other school districts. We suggest that you evaluate them and if appropriate, institute them. administration is we are all guilty of a lot of talk, and praises go to Ashley Coelho and Chip Faninga, but we need more of those people. I don't feel like what we're doing comes close to being enough, and I don't know what the answer is, and that's why possibly we need to get some type of outside consultant to just lead the way.
Other than the efforts we've been engaging in with the campaigns, with the posters around campus, we just had an assembly last week speaking to some of this as well. So we are ramping up. Is there always more that we can do? Absolutely. But we have, thanks to Barry and some of the work that's been done with the group on campus, we have been looking specifically about those things.
My comment is, are there tools out there that we just don't know about?
Sure.
But, so Mr. Superintendent, is this in your realm of responsibility to contact other school districts outside of the area that have seemed to figure out some winning formula?
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it.
Mary, you are an absolute asset to the district. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone. Item F1, the approval of the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved. Do I have a second? Second. Okay, motion and second on the floor. Do we have any discussion? Consent agenda, anything with the minutes or anything that we might want to take a look at? Okay, just a couple of things in the minutes for the last meeting. Ms. Westfall, I think that we probably already discussed it. There's some redundancy in the minutes there that potentially be corrected, correct? Thank you. And then if you would just add one thing when whoever is leads us in the flag salute, which the last meeting it was Mrs. Clevenger. Thank you. Anything else? Any more discussion? Okay, motion second. All in favor? Aye. Roll call. Roll call.
Dr. Beatty.
Aye.
Mrs. Clevenger.
Aye.
Mrs. Burgess. Aye. Mrs. Babcock.
Aye.
Mrs. Preston.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Okay, item K1. Okay, K2, athletic trainer job description proposal.
Certainly, in conjunction with Ashley Coelho and Mr. Swanix, there was a need to revamp our athletic trainer job description. So we just had a change in that position. That's always a good time to re-examine whether there's some things that could be shored up in there. So this reflects those changes for that position, and we are looking to bring somebody on board for that. And so this is submitted to you for your approval. It's a very important role on campus. It's currently paid as a stipended position, a head coach stipend position for each season of sport, 3 of them. And that plays a really important role in the health of our athletes. Any questions on the job description?
Superintendent Corey, could you point out a couple of changes or upgrades to this job description? Because I'm trying to find the old job description.
Sure. Well, it's much more thoroughly. The old one was very short. I'm sorry, we should have provided the old one or a strikeout. That would have been helpful. But much more detailed in terms of responsibilities. One of the things that has surfaced to the forefront in recent years has been concussion protocols and how we are monitoring that exceedingly
to approve the new job description for athletic trainer.
Okay. Chris, do I have a second? Second. Okay, Chris and Jan. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Dr. Beatty?
Aye.
Mrs. Cloninger?
Aye.
Mrs. Burgess?
Aye.
Mrs. Babcock?
Aye.
Mrs. Preston?
Aye. Item 3, 2019-2020 Comprehensive School Safety Plan.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and tackle this. We have Mr. Hawes in the audience as well. An annual requirement to get this approved by the board by February. Thanks to Mr. Hawes for the tremendous amount of work that it took to get this done, and also solicited a lot of input from staff as well. Involved a lot of folks. Had a stakeholder meeting with other community members. I think Dr. Bakey was a part of that as well. So this is not a public document. It was for the board's reading only because there is information in there about protocols and whatnot that we want to remain in-house. But if there are some specific questions, Mr. Hawes is happy to answer them. Thank you, Peter, for being here.
Any questions for Mr. Hawes?
All right. Thank you for all the work.
Okay. Thank you. All right, do I have a motion to approve the Comprehensive School Safety Plan?
I move to approve the plan.
Mrs. Babcock, in a second. Mrs. Burtness? Any other discussion? Roll call, please. Mrs. Westphal?
Dr. Beatty?
Aye.
Mrs. Cloninger?
Aye.
Mrs. Burgess?
Aye.
Mrs. Babcock?
Aye.
Mrs. Preston?
Aye. Okay, item L2, second interim budget planning, Ms. Lewis.
So while she's coming up, we wanted to pair this conversation she's about to have regarding budget with our budget prioritization of number 3 on there as well. Reason being, as we move into March, I'm going to encourage the board to make some decisions about some of the staffing discussions that we've been having. And so really important for us to keep in mind, remember our budget cycles are 3 years, current year plus 2 out years. I asked Mrs. Lewis if she would provide, again, for the board, and some of this will be redundant, what are the things that we need to keep in mind as we move forward in regards to some of those decisions. We are in a very fortunate position. Again, I want to remind the board that our fiscal position compared to last year is in a substantially better situation, given the success that we had with removing a significant portion of the burden with Olive Grove. We experienced...
Superintendent,
Yep.
that is such an important statement. It deserves to be said again so that everybody here in that camera understands the importance of what you just said.
Okay.
Because we have all been getting letters which suggest that a lot of the community doesn't understand. The impression, the perception is that the relative cash windfall that we have now was present a year ago, and therefore the drastic actions we took a year ago needed to have never happened. Okay. If you could kindly nail that.
And Alicia and I can tag team on this, specifically in regards to Olive Grove. At this time last year, we were facing $700,000 to just north of $1 million for a 5-year obligation annually to Olive Grove. That stood to make us insolvent by the end of that time period. We engaged in legal action, legislative advocacy, spent time in Sacramento, a lot of Public Records Act requests and compiling of data, and wound up changing state law in 6 months. That really was a miracle. And it took that burden from $700,000 to $1 million to between 100 and 150,000 approximately, which is significant. That radically changed. We had to assume at this time last year that that was going to occur, and that is now not the case. Add into that the fact that we had a very successful retirement incentive, which was a really big deal. We had 5 certificated staff that participated in that. Elisa will also touch on that in terms of what we choose to do to maximize that. There's a minimum savings that will occur even if we replace everybody, but considering what we do in terms of staff bringbacks. And then we also were very fortunate that we had that highest property taxes at least the last 5 years come in this year. Combining just those three pieces, and we are in a substantially different place than we were here. It's almost hard to comprehend that the pendulum swung that far in 1 year, but those were the realities that put us in the situation where we are right now, to actually be considering the bringing back of some staff. Yeah, you bet. How was that for an introduction?
Okay. Okay. In terms of looking at the presentation this evening, I'd really like to look at it with an eye and an ear towards second interim projections and how we want to structure the 2 out years that we have before us at second interim. So with that in mind, we're going to review the basics, although Scott kind of did that anyway. We'll just review them a little
And just for the sake of the board and the audience, defining second interim, just give us a quick.
Okay, so we report our budget at specific times throughout the year. We have an original budget that we adopt that starts out the year, and then we have a first interim, a second interim, and an unaudited actuals. So first interim is about halfway through, second interim is about 2/3 of the way, and then you have unaudited actuals, which tells you what actually happened for that year. So we are looking at second interim, and second interim is more closely where we are at for the year, and since half the year is already over, it's a lot easier to see where we're going to land. But what's most important at second interim is how we project the 2 out years, because that tells us, are we adding positions, are we taking away positions, is there a deficit, are we using our reserves? Because this is the time when you guys make plans. This is the time when you decide, are you spending down the reserve? How are you spending down the reserve? In what years are we spending down the reserve? Are we addressing the deficit? Are we not addressing the deficit? So second interim is really about the planning. And once we plan second interim and we forecast the 2 out years, that helps us with our adopted budget for 2021, because that means that we sort of have our plans set, barring any major shifts in state law or funding or the economy. So right now we're looking at second interim. So we're going to solidify our direction for the 2 out years. So we're going to review basics. We're going to touch on the structural deficit, how that plays with the excess reserve, how the retirement incentive is going to impact our budget for the second interim and the 2 out years. Reminder about impending negotiations, and then a look back at the positions that we are considering restoring or adding to the budget for next year. So we'll start with just basics. Again, we're budgeting not just for this year, but for this year and the next 2 fiscal years. We have to show the county and the state that not only can we meet our fiscal obligations in the current year, but that we can meet them for the 2 out years. All fiscal indicators are starting to show that a recession is on the way. We are about 7 to 11 years overdue for the next recession. So this has been the longest upswing from the last recession that we've had in, I don't know, the economist said several different cycles of recession. So we're long overdue for the next recession. So the fiscal indicators that they look at are growth. How quickly is the revenue for the state growing? And the revenue is still growing, but the rate at which it is growing is slowing. And that, they said, is the first indicator of the beginning of a recession. Now, granted, our county is really well insulated given the property tax point and the socioeconomic status that predominates our county. So we are well insulated for a recession, but being that we are basic aid, we have to still keep this into consideration and make sure that we are planning for that in the event that we don't see the same insulation as we've seen in the past. Like Scott mentioned, our property tax increase this year was the highest that we've seen in at least the last 5 years since I've been here. Over the last 2 years, we have done a lot to more closely closely match actuals with our projections. So that means that in previous years, we have been very conservative in our revenue projections, thereby under projecting revenues and over projecting expenditures. What that did was it left buffers in each department for tech, for maintenance, for custodial of hundreds of thousands of dollars that we had in the budget in the event we needed it, but we knew that most likely we weren't going to spend it. And that method of budgeting was put into place because at one point when that method of budgeting was adopted, we had, I believe, $1,000 left over at the end of the fiscal year. Yeah, it was very, very scary. We weren't even meeting the state minimum reserve. So the superintendent and the business manager at the time took an ultra-conservative approach in an effort to help get up to the 4% reserve and build excess reserve. Yes.
What year was that?
Oh, good God.
08, 09?
I want to say 07, 08, 08, 09. It has to do with the 2008 year. So, so it was a wake-up call to them, and they, rightfully so, they adopted this ultra-conservative budget model to get them back on track. So they wanted to make sure that everything was accounted for and then some. That worked really, really well. In our district's case, that built our reserves quite quickly, in addition to a number of unexpected windfalls, such as the almost $1 million with the RDA being dissolved. And within the last 5 years, we've just had really positive serendipitous events that have added to our excess reserves. So in response to requests from staff and trying to align our budget more closely to actuals, so we're not saying we have this huge deficit, we have this huge deficit, come unaudited actuals. We have so much extra money, because that sends a confusing message when you're trying to budget, when you're trying to prepare, and when you're trying to go to the table for negotiations. So over the last 3 years, we have slowly been increasing our revenue projections to more closely match actuals and slowly decreasing the budget buffers that have been in place. That's awesome because it allows us to really have a more accurate picture of what we're doing and where we're going. But it's also scary because if something unexpected happens, it's not in the budget, and then it does really affect your bottom line. So we need to be really careful going forward as we continue to move closer and closer to actuals, that we're more and more careful and more thoughtful in our planning process. Along with that, we currently have a debt services payment of approximately $300,000 that we spend each year that is embedded in our structural reserve. This will end in 26-27, but we still have to keep it going and talk about the structural deficit because we aren't there yet. We're not planning for those years yet.
That's the stadium, right? We built a long time ago, just for the sake of the audience who might not know that.
Yes, it's a refinancing of several projects that were poorly financed in the beginning that were refinanced with better financing, and this is the result. So yes, that is combined in there.
Yeah, when I first came on, we were paying almost $600,000 a year in debt services, which was crazy. We were fortunate enough to be able to refinance about 4 years ago, and it significantly reduced that cost. We had 2 COPs and a municipal lease.
It might be 6 years by now.
What's that?
It was before me, so it's been probably like 6.
But refied at the right time, went through that process and saved ourselves a ton of money. That's still a big chunk of change, but it's half of what it was 5 or 6 years ago. So that was good news.
Yeah, and it will end, which is awesome because that will take a chunk out of what we're talking about, our structural deficit and spending. It will take a chunk out of it, but we can't take that out of the equation until it actually is at the equation. So just know that that's on the horizon. So we'll start with structural deficit and the district's deficit spending, and it's a really hard concept to realize that we are deficit spending while we have this millions in savings. So deficit spending is when our expenditures for any given fiscal year exceed the revenue that's taken in for that fiscal year. A deficit is a deficit regardless of how many millions or trillions or billions you keep in your savings account, or in our case, our reserve. The deficit still exists. A structural deficit is a deficit that persists for a long time that's either the result of purposeful spend downs. We know we have X millions in savings and we are purposely spending it, so we are purposely spending more in these years than we are bringing in to spend down on programs, that this is a thoughtful one-time choice. The other side of structural deficit and and deficit spending is when expenses are allowed to exceed revenue and are continued to allow to exceed revenue because we have this savings account buffer and we just say it's fine because our savings can cover it. That can only go on for so long. Long-term deficit spending is not sustainable. We have projected a deficit in the district probably since 2008 when I told you we had $1,000 left over. The first actual deficit that we've seen since I've been here was on the books last year at unaudited actuals. We transferred in $1 million from Fund 17 into Fund 01 last year, and there was still a $520,000 deficit. So the structural deficit does exist. A number of factors do contribute to it. One of those factors is something positive like the restructuring of our debt and debt services, and it is projected to end, but currently it still does create a structural deficit that we need to address.
Sam, what's the percentage on that debt service?
That's a very fine question. I will get you the answer, but I do not know it off the top of my head, but I will let you know. So to help understand why structural deficit is such a big deal when we know we have millions in our reserve, I've made a little chart. So the numbers that I use for the chart are strictly for illustration, just to get the point across on why the structural deficit is a problem for the district. So if we take, the 1920 year, you see that our revenue is less than our expenditures for the year, leaving that deficit. But our reserve, all the way far to the right, is huge. It's no problem. We'll use the reserve to cover the deficit, and we're fine. Okay, so now 1920 turns into 2021. The revenue goes up, expenditures go up, that's normal. There's still a deficit, but we still have a reserve. It's down a little bit because we've spent out of it last year to cover our deficit, but it's still fine because our reserve still covers our deficit. So now 2021 turns into 21-22. Revenue again.
Go back one.
Ooh, I don't know if that will do that. Hold on, it won't do that because it's complicated.
Sorry, well, I can describe
It's okay.
what it showed. With 2021, it showed the deficit and the reserve are the same height.
Right, it's just for illustration.
Okay, well, I mean, that would suggest that we have just completely depleted our reserves to pay for that deficit.
Right, well, when you have a deficit, the reserves are used to cover that for the year. So what I did was, I think I used like 5, 10, 15, 20, and I just raised revenue by 5 and then raised expenditures by 5. And
I mean,
so
for this example, from 21, 22, we have no more reserve.
Exactly.
But yet the next chart seems to indicate we still do have reserve.
Well, but the numbers are just for illustration. It's just showing that like revenue will still go up, expenditures will still go up, and every year your deficit still increases. And every year that the deficit increases, you're using more and more out of your reserves to cover that deficit. Does that make sense? Okay.
There are no units on that.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to use it for units. I'm not using our district's numbers or anything like that. It's just illustrated for the purposes of showing that as the deficit grows, the reserve decreases because we're using it. Revenue still goes up as normal, expenditures still go up as normal, and as we know, with PERS and STIRS and unfunded mandates and labor negotiations, expenditures rise quicker than revenues will rise in terms of percentages. So when we get to 3 years, 5 years, even maybe 7 years out, because these numbers are just fake numbers for illustration, we get to a point where the deficit in 1920 and what it would have taken to resolve the deficit in 1920 is a lot smaller than the deficit that now needs to be resolved in 22, 23, and the reserve is no longer there.
So the chart that I want to see is 23, 24. Now we have no reserve.
Exactly.
But we've got a deficit that we're required to service to pay.
Exactly.
So there needs to be a fourth line.
The fourth line is the green expenditures go way, way down past revenue and past the deficit. And that's, I guess the point that we're trying to make is that that's not reasonable, and you don't want to be, as a board, put in a position where you have to be reactionary.
We're insolvent at that point.
Oh, yeah, you're well beyond insolvent. Oh, yeah. Yes, that is for sure.
No sugarcoat.
No, that is for sure, 100%. But, you know, the impact is that you as a board are sitting there having to make these horrible decisions that may not have had to be made definitely to the same degree, in the same manner, with your back up against the wall, whereas we could have made slower, more thoughtful decisions.
So then I guess in 23, 24, then that's when we go to Olive Grove and ask for a loan?
Or we say, hey, you want to come teach our kids for us for free on our campus? Or pay us? You know, we get creative. So the point is just we want to be careful, because while deficit spending can be covered with the amount of money that we have in our savings right now, there will come a point, if we continue to ignore it, where the savings is gone and the deficit still exists, and we're left trying to figure out how to correct that. And it's not a situation I think any one of us wants to be in. So that's just the situation. That's what a deficit is. That's why it's dangerous, and why, despite the fact that we can cover it and it's not earth-shattering at this point, it is something that we don't want to take lightly, and that if we can avoid adding to, we really want to avoid that. On the flip side of the coin, apparently we're millionaires, because we have at least $3.7 million in excess reserve above and beyond the $3 million static reserve that the board policy has set in place to keep as a minimum. So the state minimum reserve requirement for our district is based on ADA, as it is for every district in California. It's only 4%. For our district, this equates to a little over $500,000. This won't even cover 1 month of payroll. If we were to only keep a 4% reserve and something horrific happened, we can't pay our people for a month. So that is really unrealistic for a basic aid district. So the district, I believe it's 3 years ago now, enacted a minimum reserve policy. We started out with a percentage of a reserve, and because expenditures keep increasing, the percentage stayed the same, but the minimum reserve kept increasing, because as expenditures increase, the percentage of expenditures is the same, but the amount that equals that percentage grew with the expenditures. So in order to curtail that, we went from a percentage of expenditures to a static $3 million reserve. Currently, that equates to approximately 22% of our expenditures. As our expenditures rise, that $3 million becomes a smaller percentage every year. It is really, really, really a bad idea for a basic aid district of any size to carry less than a 20% reserve. So we're at 22%, so we need to be careful. We need to be mindful that that $3 million is cutting it close to the 20% as it is. Reserves are one-time monies. They're not coming back. We've been really, really blessed and fortunate the last 5 years to have these random windfalls. We cannot count on those continuing to happen. We need to prepare for the reserves to not keep growing. And again, we, in years past, have had not only our excess reserves in Fund 01, but we've had a nice little niche of excess reserves in Fund 17. We've now depleted Fund 17 entirely by transferring it into Fund 01. So what you see in Fund 01, in terms of reserves and extra money, that's it. It's not like we're saying, hey, we have excess reserves in Fund 01, we only have a 22% reserve, let's just not talk about Fund 17. That doesn't exist anymore. So we need to be very mindful that this is it.
It's my fault that Fund 17 is now in Fund 01. I was not comfortable with that, but we did it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So just know we do have a lot of reserves. We're at about a 22% reserve that we have as our minimum fund balance right now, and we have about $3.7 million over and above this. So we are not hurting in any respect in terms of reserves. Now we look at the impact of the retirement incentive. So we know we have a deficit, and we know we have a bunch of reserves, and now we have a retirement incentive. Until we determine what our staffing levels will be for 2021, we won't know the true impact of the retirement incentive. We know that at a minimum, we'll save the $250,000 over 5 years, and we know at a maximum we saved, I believe it was $2.1 million over 5 years. Where we will actually fall is going to be somewhere in the middle. However, whatever savings we realize from the retirement incentive, that offsets in our budget our current structural deficit. So we're not really adding a lot of savings. We are adding savings, but we're not fully eliminating our deficit, put it that way. Our deficit will most likely still exist because it's, I think, pretty unreasonable to believe that we would be able to not fill all positions that retired. I don't think that that's reasonable. So we will be somewhere in the middle. So while it's a positive, we just need to be very careful and understand how it interacts with the deficit and know that it won't completely eliminate it. Any positions that we add or restore will go back to adding to the deficit. So it offsets savings from the retirement incentive. So they all sort of play together on a little balancing beam. We also need to keep on the horizon. Our CBA expires June 30th, 2021. Negotiations are not optional. They will result in increased expenditures. The only question is, what will those expenditures look like? Will they be one-time in nature? Will they be ongoing in nature? What will they look like? So no matter what, expenditures are going to increase. Just know that that's coming. Each of these positions on this list represents an increase in ongoing expenditures and an increase in the structural deficit. That's offset by any retirement savings that we may realize, but it just goes back to adding to where we are. So just know that it just sort of plays a balancing game. These are the additional positions being considered outside of the restoration of positions, and depending on the structure of these positions, they may well represent one-time contracted expenditures or ongoing. It would just depend on how the district chose to structure them. So they could be either or. So tying it all together, we are a really odd duck as a district in that we do have a structural deficit. We've had an ongoing structural deficit, but we have these ballooning large reserves. So we need to come up with a plan to purposefully eliminate the deficit while spending down reserves. So it's an interesting place to be in. Our static reserve level is fine now, but as our expenditures increase, the reserve amount will need to be adjusted, because that $3 million will represent less and less and less as the expenditures increase, as they do. Again, the savings from the retirement incentive will reduce our deficit and decrease our expenditures, but negotiations will just increase the deficit and the expenditures on the other side. And again, the addition of new or the restoration of old positions further increases deficit, increases expenditures. So with all that in mind, we need to be mindful of how we go forward and how we structure both second interim and our 2 out years so that we are trying to manage both our deficit, keeping down the excess reserves, and making sure that we're doing right by you all and the students and the staff.
So Alicia, I think I asked this once before. I'm sure. Are there any projections from the county on our property tax percentage? Is it, we just got lucky this year? Is there a, even if there's a potential recession?
So they won't give us anything past the current period. They call them P1 or P2. And right now, all we have to go on is P1 numbers, and the P1 numbers came in strong. They won't tell us whether they agree that those numbers will increase over next year or decrease. They don't tell us any of that. They purposely refuse to sort of do that because they don't want people budgeting based on their forecasting. But they rely heavily on CASBO and CSCA and all these different organizations that help schools with their budget, and they all believe that the signs, the indicators of a recession have started. Again, for us, all that means is that it would slow our growth probably. In other districts, you could see a decline in property taxes. our socioeconomic bubble that we're in, that, I mean, it would be, it's not likely, really, really unlikely, so.
And Jim, but if you want to look, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
If you look in the rearview mirror, going back as far as Proposition 13,
Right.
the average increase over time is 2.5%.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I remember that number, but I was thinking, would they
That's
hold
still-
them to it, you know?
No, absolutely not, no. First, we can't hold them to that, and second, while that's our 30-year average, if you like, put it to like a 5-year average, that's,
It's low.
So that's why we're going towards increasing our projections and getting closer to actuals so that we're not projecting a 10% increase, but we're also not projecting 2, because we all know good and well it's not going to be 2.
Well, it always comes up as one of the sticking points, if you will, during negotiations that with the
Property taxes will be higher than what you're saying.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of a crapshoot.
It is. I mean, it is and it isn't. If you use the 30-year historical average, the 2.5 is totally reasonable. If you use the closer, 5, 10 years, it needs to increase a little bit. So it's just a matter of how conservative does the board want to budget. So what we've seen the last 4 or 5 years is that we are conservative, and we do intend to stay conservative, but our degree with which we are leaning is a little bit more towards actuals than just 2.5 because it's the 30-year average.
Which has been a huge growth point for Alicia. It's another preference. So, thank you very much for the information.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Alicia, I know you said this, but I must have been deep. The gap between the monies that we will be saving because of the early retirement is something as low as $250,000, something as high as $2+ million.
Correct.
And is that based, can it be purely on the unknown as to how many of these vacancies we're going to leave vacant or we're going to replace? I'm sure there's something else that's affecting that, or is that purely it?
Well, that is purely it, but it's a matter of, first of all, how many positions that are being vacated are we going to fill? And then when we go to fill them, are we filling them, in teachers' instances, are we filling them at step 3? Are we filling them at step 6? Are they on column 9? Are they on column 2? So the variance with which we could hire is so great.
So Superintendent Corey, we already have locked in who's taking advantage of the program. So where are we at then with this decision on which positions we're not going to be?
So we're currently having, this is discussions that we need to have internally with staff and talk about, is there a way to, what are the minimum needs that we have? What are the expectations for classroom sizes that we have? How do we still keep it reasonable for teachers in terms of student loads in classrooms and not backfill a position? If we backfill everything, that's that $250,000 you're talking about over 5 years, we save that $250,000. With 5 certificated staff that left, there is a significant opportunity to look and say, okay, we just had this conversation today with Faculty Association. What are we going to do in terms of restructuring with elected ducks based on who's leaving and what their credentialing was and what they've been teaching? That defines the holes. Combine that with, do we want to replace in kind? Do we want to redo? And I think we've got some very strong thoughts based on our strategic plan about what we need to be offering for students. It's a significant retooling opportunity. We will definitely have to fill some gaps for next year, keeping in mind that we're already registering our junior high students. I mean, that schedule is out. So what does the 1 to 3 year vision look like for course offerings that we want to have? We're having those conversations right
So
now.
that's a tenfold difference in potential savings. So
for sure,
before the board is able to make some decisions on budget planning, and I think you said you want that to be done by next month, we need to know what type of savings the early retirement program is going to be providing us.
Sure, and that'll depend. That's completely dependent on what we backfill. We've already backfilling all, or we're backfilling the.
I understand that. So when is that decision going to be made?
So that's a conversation we're having right now.
And so that's been rather cautiously saying when the board votes up to recommend whatever, it's rather this is likely, but there could be some other pieces to it.
Correct.
I mean, it's never done until the first day of school starts. There's always something.
Yes.
Crazy.
But John and I had a really good conversation about getting a little more granular for the board on the options that we have before us and saying, okay, if we do this, what does this provide for staff, for students, and what is the exact fiscal, and looking at those in more granular detail. Also have a survey going out to staff tomorrow. We've been talking about this list of priorities. There's another thing I talked about with the Faculty Association. In terms of, from a staff perspective, just to find, we think we've captured staff perspective, but to really get that and say, listen, these are the things the board is considering. Are there other pieces from your perspective as well? One, prioritize those. Two, are there other things that we're missing in there? And then I think, again, as John and I were talking about, I think this warrants a special meeting in March for us to sit down and talk just about this. What are our strategic goals that we're after? What are the fiscal implications? What are the climate implications in classrooms if we make these certain decisions, and drilling down on that more for all of you so you can make a better decision.
And the board won't see financial documents in terms of budget with any of your decisions in place until we get to adopted budget, because by law I have to have second interim to you by March 15th and our meeting is March 4th. So the second interim that you're going to see is pretty much where we are, and if we were to stay the course of where we are, since we're not making decisions tonight. So just know that what comes before you on March 4th will not include a retirement incentive savings because we don't know what it is, or any addition of positions or anything like that. It's literally, if we were to continue exactly as we are in this point in time, what will it look like in 3 years?
And so that's why Alicia's list is really instructive for us, because it talks about all those things to consider. The good news is that we're even considering them. Given where we were a year ago, that we're even having this conversation, that we are in a financial position of health to even be talking about this is a really good thing. I'm sorry, John, you can say something.
No, I'm just saying that those numbers are really critical for us to be able to know, I guess.
Yes.
So maybe we just split the difference and assume that there would be something
yes.
at 1 point.
We are willing to push the envelope a little bit more.
I want to say one thing too. I very much appreciate sending out the survey to the staff, because I think that we really want to see their input, because they're the ones down in the trenches and they know what we need, and their opinions are valuable to us when we're moving ahead. Absolutely.
You bet. Any other questions for Alicia?
Thank you.
Thanks for the time putting this together. That was a lot of good information.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Mr. Corey, shall we move on to item 3, budget prioritization?
Yes, I think I would like to, after my conversation with John, I think it would behoove us to hold a special meeting in March to talk specifically about this issue. The reason we're meeting so early in March, by the way, keep in mind, is because there's always a potential of March 15 notices, since the personnel things that have to happen. So anyway, we'll get all that squared away in March 4, but I think some dedicated time was a good idea for us to sit down and do that. So that would give us time, if we did something mid-March, that would give Alicia and I adequate time to set that up for you.
Do we need to set a date in March now?
We certainly could, or Mrs. Westfall could get in touch with each of you and set that up, some possible dates, so we can list out some possibilities for you.
Okay.
And we'll get on that.
Okay.
All right, but thank you very much.
All right. Okay, board comments and correspondence. Any comments from the board?
Yes, I have 3 things.
Okay.
Number 1, at the last board meeting, as you may recall, there was a presentation given about the rehab of Refugio Trail, and I thought we were all in agreement that there would be some type of letter drafted for each of us to sign in support of that. Is there any progress on that?
Yeah, I have not been in touch with, I was gone last week, but have not been in touch with Faith about that. I'll nail that down with her next week.
Okay, just so it doesn't fall through
No,
the cracks.
actually, no.
Likewise, I just want to reaffirm that I'm wanting to be involved, Superintendent Corey, with any ad hoc committee that is involved in selection of the new math textbooks.
Yes. Okay.
I just want to make sure that that request isn't being forgotten. And then finally, since it wasn't on the agenda, I'm going to use the board comment and correspondence. I would like to have on the agenda for next month's meeting a proposal that for graduation, the 5 board members be encouraged to wear cap, gown, and robes. And when I made this suggestion, the response I got was that this is something that's not routinely done and it might distract from the occasion. So I've actually done some research, and just within our county, this is a practice which Santa Barbara High, Longpoint, Cabrillo, Napoma, Santa Maria, Carpinteria, and San Marcos all do. So I have to assume that it's not distracting from the occasion. In fact, I would submit that it certainly adds to it, because what we want to do is to show these students how proud we are of each other's accomplishments. We certainly laud our faculty for wearing their cap and gown. And I think the students would appreciate seeing that we all have at our advanced years, we still are very celebratory of our own personal academics.
John, are you saying that those schools, the board members wear?
That's exactly what I'm saying. The way I know that is because I simply Googled and YouTubed commencement exercises for these different high schools, and it takes a while, but finally you find the appropriate shot which shows everybody sitting on a stage.
Okay.
And so once again, San Ynez High School is number 1. We're the only one.
It's interesting because Santa Barbara, I've been to several Santa Barbara district graduations, and none of the board members wear colors.
So Mr. Corey,
Yeah,
Mr. Corey and I did talk about this.
Okay.
It's not that we did not talk about it. First of all, we did not put it on the agenda because it's a site staff decision to do so, not necessarily within the board's purview. So I guess at this point we would just ask what the wishes of the board are. We don't have to really make a decision right now, but
I'm just thinking, in fairness, is it a necessity for someone sitting on the board to have a degree and have a cap and gown to wear?
Well, I'm assuming you all have high school degrees.
Well, I'm just assuming what kind of.
that's an interesting
I'm just
question in
thinking
terms of protocol.
I'm thinking in
Yeah.
broad scope of everyone, perhaps there's someone.
Everybody that has a degree, even if it's just a GED, has the ability.
So you're just saying, okay, just to wear a robe?
Well, no, they're all color-coded. Your alma mater has its official colors. So the
Yeah,
school.
I'm just trying to,
So, I mean,
clarify that it's
Yeah,
not.
I mean, I don't know, but every time I go to a college graduation, it gives me pleasure to sit there in the audience and look at the colors that this person's sleeve has. Oh, that must be the School of Pharmacy, and oh, that's the School of Nursing, that's the School of Business, that's the School of Engineering. Oh, and then that third color, oh, that's the university. I get it. The university's got those colors, and the school within the university has got those colors. I mean, it's fun. It adds to the pomp and circumstance of the ceremony.
Well, we get a medal for doing that because I wore the black gowns on that field, the artificial turf, for many years, and it's a great way to lose weight. I'll just put it that way.
The students and
It's a
faculty
quick weight loss
do it.
program.
Is it something that we need to consider right now? Can we gel on it a little bit?
Well,
Yeah, let's think why don't we just think about it?
That's
We don't
fine,
have
but
to
the last thing I want to hear is, well, too late, Dr. Bakey, because we don't have enough time between now and commencement exercise to be able to work it.
I appreciate that.
That's all.
So, and I'm glad that you brought it up. So why don't we just think about it? We don't need to take action on it.
Right.
Scott and I can talk about it a little bit more, and then we'll get it figured out whether we do it or we don't. How's that sound? Everybody in agreement with that, Peter? any other,
Yes, I have a
wait a minute,
question.
I just wanted to say I do apologize to you for not getting back to you further about that, but Scott and I did talk about it, and so I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
about that.
This was a question that I had asked, believe it or not, in May of 2019, and I don't frankly recall the answer. And if somebody answered the question, then my mistake. So I'll ask the question again, and that is, why does the school district only offer remedial classes in the summer at summer school, but nothing for our more motivated children?
Just traditionally it's been credit recovery, so the students with deficit did not pass a course subject that was offered this summer.
No, that wasn't quite my question. I understand why we have the remedial classes. What I don't understand is why don't we offer the highly motivated children summer school classes as well?
It's been money and staff. So whether or not we want to pay for it, and if there's enough students that want to take the courses.
Well, maybe this is the perfect time in our financial climate to be seeing whether there would be interest in the academic community.
That's an interesting idea. The one thing that I would be concerned about, which I think is a problem with the remedial classes in the summer, our summer school only lasts for 1 month. And so for a student to get any kind of credit, I mean, if you're doing recovery credit, they kind of look the other way, but for like an enrichment course, I mean, if we had enrichment courses or something, but I don't know how many, I can't imagine that they get the full amount of units for a semester just for going from 1 month to summer school. Does that make sense?
It does, but it happens.
I mean, I like your idea. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure.
It does, but it happens. I mean, just to give you, for example, my daughter is taking a night school every Monday night for 3 hours once a week. And so if this was in summer school, then you would take a 3-hour class Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and after 3 weeks, you've done a whole semester. Just as an example.
Educated student.
Well, that's different than-
No, I'm just teasing.
Okay. Any other comments from the board at this time? Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice here. I apologize. Okay, thank you. Let's see, upcoming board meeting dates. The next scheduled regular meeting of the board is March 4th, 2020. It is a Wednesday. It will be at 5:30 as far as we know at this time. Sounds like there is some discussion about a special meeting in March. Ms. Westfall will help us along with that and throw some dates out to the board. Okay. Okay, and do I have a motion to adjourn? Okay. Jan and Chris, all in favor? Aye. Chair votes aye. The time, Ms. Westfall, I have is 7:15.